My sister-in-law humiliated me at her bachelorette party and made me sleep on the floor. Now she's begging for forgiveness after the entire family exposed her, and she's completely isolated. I'm 32 years old. I'm married to the love of my life. And after what happened a few months ago with my sister-in-law, I can finally breathe easy. But let me tell you this whole story from the beginning, because it's totally crazy, and I need to get it off my chest. I met Lindsey, my husband Brian's sister, like 4 years ago, when he and I had been dating for about 6 months and things were going really well between us. Brian warned me before introducing me to his family that his sister could be a little difficult, but I thought, all families have their weird things. It can't be that bad, right? Well, turns out it could be that bad. The first time I saw Lindsey was at a family dinner at Brian's parents' house. We arrived and she was there with her mother Beverly, who by the way at first seemed super sweet and kind, one of those ladies who makes you feel welcome and offers you food every 5 minutes. Lindsey was like 25 years old at the time, worked in, I don't know what, marketing or social media thing, and when Brian introduced me, she looked me up and down with the weirdest face and said, "Oh, have we met before?" And I told her no, that it was the first time, and she insisted, "No, I swear I've seen you somewhere. Are you sure?" The thing is, I knew perfectly well that we had never met, and Brian knew it too, but she kept going on about it for like 5 minutes until her mother told her to drop it. Then, when we were sitting at the table, Lindsey stared at me and said, "Hey Victoria, do you normally wear a lot of makeup? Because today you look different, like really made up." And I just sat there thinking, what? Because literally that day I was only wearing a bit of mascara and lip gloss. Practically nothing. And she said it with that super fake concerned voice as if she really cared. Brian squeezed my hand under the table and quickly changed the subject. For the next 2 years, every time I saw Lindsey, it was the same thing. She always had some comment about my appearance, my clothes, my hair, whatever. One day she told me my dress was cute, but that color didn't really flatter me. You know what I mean? Like those comments that technically aren't direct insults, but that make you feel like crap. Another time she commented that I should consider wearing more accessories because I looked too simple. And when I started wearing more accessories, she said it looked like I was trying too hard to get attention. I literally couldn't win with her. And the worst part is, she always did it in front of other people, especially her mother Beverly, who never said anything to her. I tried to stay calm because, well, she's my husband's sister and I didn't want to cause problems, but inside I was about to explode. One day, I finally asked Brian what was up with his sister, because I was fed up with putting up with her passive-aggressive comments, and he sat down with me and explained something he should have told me from the beginning. Turns out Lindsey had always been like that, since high school, like the classic mean girl who made other women's lives impossible. He told me that Lindsey had done the same thing to a cousin they had, constantly criticizing her and making her feel bad until the cousin stopped going to family gatherings. He also told me that his ex-girlfriend Brian had a 2-year relationship before meeting me, had similar problems with Lindsey, and that his mother Beverly had always justified her daughter's behavior by saying it was just her way of being, that deep down she was a good person. Brian told me he was really sorry, that he should have warned me better, but that he thought maybe with me it would be different because I got along well with his family. Or so he thought. I guess I felt a little better knowing it wasn't just me, but I also got angry because, seriously, hadn't anyone in that family told Lindsey that her behavior was unacceptable? After that conversation, I decided to change my strategy. Brian, I suggested I just ignore her completely, not react to her comments, act like she basically didn't exist. And the truth is, it worked pretty well for a while. The next family gathering, when Lindsey made a comment about my hairstyle, I just smiled and kept talking to someone else as if she hadn't said anything. I could see on her face that it frustrated her that I wasn't paying attention to her, and honestly, that gave me a certain satisfaction. I continued with that tactic for several months, and things were relatively calm, or at least I thought so. Everything changed like 8 months ago when Lindsey got engaged to her boyfriend of 3 years, a guy who, in my opinion, was too good for her, but whatever, it wasn't my problem. About 2 months after the engagement, Lindsey called me on the phone, which was already weird because she never called me directly. She always passed messages through Brian or her mother. She told me she wanted to talk to me about something important, and I thought, here we go, what now? But surprisingly, she told me she wanted to apologize for how she had been with me, that she had been reflecting on her behavior and realized she had been unfair. She told me she was trying to be a better person now that she was getting married, that she wanted to start over with me, and that as a gesture of good faith, she was inviting me to her bachelorette party that was going to be at a super luxurious spa resort like 6 hours away. I was like, seriously? Because after 2 years of putting up with her shit, now she wanted to be my friend? But she sounded very sincere on the phone, almost like she was about to cry, and she told me she really wanted us to be like real sisters. I told her I would think about it and talk to Brian, who told me the decision was mine, but that maybe Lindsey had really matured and was being genuine. I decided to go on the trip, basically because I thought maybe it was time to leave everything behind and give her a real chance. Brian was happy that I was going. His mother Beverly also called me to tell me she was very happy that Lindsey and I were finally going to connect, and I convinced myself that it was going to be a good weekend. The spa resort was super expensive, like $400 a night, but Lindsey said she was going to cover everything to make up for the previous years, so I only had to bring money for tips and stuff. It was going to be her best friend Kristen, another high school friend named Rebecca, and me. The two friends were basically copies of Lindsey, those girls who never left their high school mean girl mentality. The day of the trip came, and we agreed that Kristen was going to drive because she had a big SUV. I arrived on time at the meeting point, and the other three were already there putting their suitcases in the car. Lindsey greeted me super effusively, gave me a hug and everything, and officially introduced me to Kristen and Rebecca as her future sister-in-law. The 6-hour drive was literally the most uncomfortable of my life. The three of them spent the whole time talking about people I didn't know, things that happened in high school, gossip about other friends, and every time I tried to get into the conversation or make a comment, they basically ignored me or quickly changed the subject. It was like I didn't exist in that car, and I started to realize that maybe I had made a huge mistake by agreeing to go. I thought about saying something, but I didn't want to seem dramatic or ruin the trip before it started, so I just put on my headphones and listened to music, trying not to think too much about it. We arrived at the spa resort around 7 at night, and the place was beautiful. I'm not going to lie. Like those places you see on Instagram with incredible views and everything decorated, super elegant. We checked in, and when we got to the room, I realized there were only 2 queen-size beds. I assumed we were going to sleep 2 per bed, right? Because we were 4 people in 2 beds? The math is clear. But then Lindsey said, "Okay, girls, Kristen and I in one bed, Rebecca in the other, and Victoria, you can sleep on the floor. We brought some extra blankets for you." And she said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, with a smile on her face, and I just stood there thinking, are you kidding? I asked her if she was serious, and she said, "Oh, yeah, it's just that the beds are a little small and the 3 of us have known each other for years, so we feel more comfortable sharing. But you'll be fine on the floor. The floor is super soft." Kristen and Rebecca laughed like it was an inside joke, and I felt my blood boiling. I told them I wasn't going to sleep on the floor, that was ridiculous and disrespectful, and that if there wasn't room in the beds, then I could pay for my own room, but I wasn't going to stay there under those conditions. Lindsey looked offended and said I was overreacting, that it was just a weekend and I should relax a little, that I had no sense of humor. She was basically telling me that I was the problem for not wanting to sleep on a hotel floor after driving 6 hours to go to her bachelorette party. At that moment, something in me just broke. Like when you've endured so much that you just can't anymore. I told Lindsey that this had clearly been a trap from the beginning, that she never intended to apologize or treat me well, and that she had brought me there just to humiliate me in front of her friends. She tried to say I was crazy, that I was being dramatic, but I wasn't listening to her anymore. I grabbed my suitcase, looked for the car keys that Kristen had left on the table, and told them I was leaving. Lindsey started screaming that I couldn't take the car, that it was Kristen's, but I told her that if they wanted their car back, they could come get it at my house in a few days, that I wasn't going to stay there another minute. Kristen tried to block the door, but I pushed her and got out of that room, while all 3 were yelling at me that I was spoiled, that I was ruining the bachelorette party. How dare I? I went down to the parking lot, got in the SUV, and drove the 6 hours back home by myself at night. I was crying with rage the whole way. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I could only think about all the times I had put up with Lindsey's comments. All the times I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace. I got home around 3 in the morning, and Brian was awake waiting for me because I had sent him a short text message telling him I was on my way. When he saw me arrive, he got scared because I was a mess, with my face swollen from crying so much, and I told him everything that had happened. I watched Brian's face get redder and redder as I talked, and when I finished telling him, he grabbed his phone and called Lindsey. He didn't care that it was 3 in the morning. He yelled at her like I had never heard him yell. He told her she was a spoiled and cruel brat, that he couldn't believe she had done that, and that neither he nor I were going to go to her wedding, to forget about us. Lindsey tried to defend herself, saying I had overreacted, that it was just a joke. But Brian didn't let her talk and hung up the phone on her. During the following days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Lindsey, Kristen, and Rebecca called me and sent me messages saying I had to convince Brian to go to the wedding, that Lindsey couldn't get married without her brother there, that I was selfish for having caused this drama. I made it very clear to them that I wasn't going to convince Brian of anything, that his sister had treated me like garbage from day one and that this time she had crossed a line. Then Beverly, my mother-in-law, started calling me too. She told me I had to understand that Lindsey was under a lot of stress with the wedding, that maybe things had been misinterpreted, that I was part of the family and had to be the more mature person here. I told her the problem wasn't mine, that her daughter had humiliated me on purpose, but she kept insisting that I could fix it if I wanted to. One night around 11, Brian got up from bed, put on his shoes, and told me he was going to his parents' house, that this had to end. He drove like half an hour there and had a huge fight with Beverly. I stayed home waiting, looking at my phone every 5 minutes, and when Brian came back like 2 hours later, he told me his mother had basically given him an ultimatum. She told him that if he didn't go to Lindsey's wedding, she was going to make the entire extended family cut contact with us, that she was going to tell everyone that Brian was a bad brother who abandoned his family for a manipulative woman, meaning me, and that Beverly was never going to forgive us. Brian told her to do whatever she wanted, that he wasn't going to force me to be in a place where they didn't respect me, and that, if that meant losing his family, then so be it. Like 3 days before the wedding, around 7 in the morning, when Brian and I were getting ready to go to work, there was a knock on our door. I opened it and there were Beverly and Lindsey, both with super serious faces. They said they needed to talk to Brian urgently, that it was important. I let them in because, well, technically they were family even though I didn't want to see them anymore. They sat in the living room, and when Brian came down the stairs, his mother immediately started with how they needed to solve this as a family, that they couldn't let a silly fight ruin Lindsey's wedding. Lindsey was sitting there playing the victim, saying she just wanted her brother to be there on the most important day of her life, that I had completely misinterpreted her on the trip. And that's when I just exploded. I had been putting up with all this shit in silence for like 3 months, trying to be the calm and rational person, but I couldn't anymore. I told both of them exactly what I thought, unfiltered, not worrying about sounding rude. I told Lindsey she was a manipulative liar, that she had spent 2 years making me feel like garbage with her comments about my appearance, and then had the nerve to invite me to her bachelorette party just to humiliate me in front of her pathetic friends. I told her she was an insecure person who needed to make other women feel bad to feel better about herself, and that it didn't surprise me that her only strategy in life was to be a bully like in high school. Then I turned to Beverly and told her she was equally guilty for having raised such a cruel daughter and for always justifying her behavior instead of correcting it, that she was a bad mother for allowing Lindsey to treat people like that without consequences. They both just stood there with their mouths open, completely in shock, because I think they never expected me to say something like that to them. Lindsey started, crying, like those fake cries she used to manipulate people, and Beverly told me I was a horrible person. How dare I speak to them like that they had only come to try to fix things and I was attacking them. Brian, who had been quiet this whole time, told them to get out of our house, that they weren't welcome if they couldn't respect his wife, and that the conversation was over. They both left furious, Beverly yelling that she was going to cut us off from the family and that we were going to regret it, and Lindsey crying dramatically as if she were the victim of this whole situation. Lindsey got married 2 weeks later without Brian or me attending. We blocked Beverly, Lindsey, Kristen, and Rebecca from our phones and social media, and honestly, it was a huge relief not to have to deal with their drama constantly. We thought that was the end of it all, that we could finally live in peace without all that toxicity, but turns out the story didn't end there. Like a month after the wedding, we started receiving calls and messages from uncles, cousins, and other members of Brian's extended family asking what had really happened. Apparently, in her wedding speech, Lindsey had mentioned Brian and me, saying something like, it was very sad that her brother and sister-in-law couldn't be there because I had caused a bunch of unnecessary drama and that she had tried to make peace, but I was very difficult and dramatic. She basically painted us as the villains of her story. But here comes the good part. The part that makes all of this worthwhile. A cousin of Brian's who was at the wedding called us and told us that Lindsay's speech had seemed super weird to him, that it didn't sound like the whole story, and he asked us directly what had happened. Brian told him everything, absolutely everything, from the passive-aggressive comments of the last 2 years to the floor thing at the spa resort. The cousin was like in shock and told other family members, who also started contacting us to hear our version. All of them already knew Lindsay. They already knew she had a history of being a mean girl, so when they heard what really happened, it wasn't hard for them to believe us. The extended family started cutting contact with Lindsay and Beverly. Uncles who used to defend Lindsay now saw her for what she really was. Cousins who thought Beverly was a wonderful mother realized she was just an enabler who protected her daughter's toxic behavior. We found out later that Lindsay had a complete breakdown when she realized her own family was isolating her, and that Beverly was furious because now she was also being excluded from family gatherings. Turns out, making people feel like garbage for years has consequences? Who would have thought? It's been like 5 months since the wedding, and Brian and I are living completely free of family drama. We're still in contact with several members of his family who supported us and who finally saw the truth about Lindsay. Beverly and Lindsay tried to contact us like 2 months ago through an aunt, asking us to meet to talk, but we told them we weren't interested. I don't need an apology from people who only apologize when they realize their actions have real consequences. Brian is much happier now that he doesn't have to deal with his mother and sister's toxicity, and I can finally breathe without worrying that someone is going to make a comment about my clothes or my makeup. I guess in the end, everything resolved itself. The truth came to light and the toxic people ended up exactly where they deserved to be, alone and without the support they thought they would always have.